Chancellor, the Committee of the University has resolved to award the degree of Doctor of the University to Professor Roy Webb. Chancellor. Professor Roy Webb was the second Vice Chancellor of Griffith University and led the university for a record 17 years, from January 1985 until his retirement in January this year. Roy Webb was born in Melbourne in 1935. He was educated at Essendon Grammar and Wesley College and graduated from the University of Melbourne with a Bachelor of Commerce. He gained his Doctor of Philosophy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. After a distinguished academic career and terms as Dean of the Faculty of Commerce and Chair of the Academic Board at the University of Melbourne, Professor Webb took up office as the second Vice Chancellor of Griffith University in January 1985, presiding at that time over a single campus institution at Nathan of less than 4,000 students in 5 schools. Indeed, at the time, there were only 6 undergraduate programs in the university with an annual income of just $23 million. Today, Griffith has 5 campuses, nearly 27,000 students, 3,000 staff, and an annual income over $320 million. The development of Griffith into a broadly based multi-campus university with an enviable national and international reputation owes a great deal to Professor Webb's leadership and management during his term as Vice-Chancellor. When Professor Webb took up that office, it was on the eve of a sustained period of radical reform and change for the Australian higher education sector. Following the publication of the Green Paper and the White Paper on higher education by then Federal Education Minister, Sir John Dawkins, which promulgated a policy of institutional amalgamations, Professor Webb took several initiatives to ensure that Griffith capitalised on the opportunities offered by the new policy. It is a tribute to his negotiating skills that Griffith successfully concluded 4 amalgamations: the Mount Gravatt campus of Brisbane CAE, the Gold Coast CAE, the Queensland Conservatorium of Music and the Queensland College of Art. The result has been the emergence of a major university in terms of size, breadth and depth of program offerings, and an acknowledged track record of achievement in teaching, research and community service. From early in his time at Griffith, Professor Webb saw the need for the university to expand the range of its program offerings, particularly by moving into professional areas and by introducing innovative degrees which met or anticipated developing community needs. By pursuing ideas of his own, by supporting proposals from staff within the university, Professor Webb provided opportunities for Griffith to expand its academic profile into the professions, including law, education and engineering, as well as new areas such as aviation, biomedical science, contemporary Australian Indigenous art, child and family studies and multimedia. At the same time, the university built on its existing strengths by establishing Australia's first undergraduate programs in international business, microelectronic engineering and environmental engineering. Professor Webb was a major force in developing and expanding Griffith's research culture by introducing incentive schemes into the university's budget arrangements. Griffith is now poised to establish itself as one of the top 10 research-active universities in Australia. The university has recognised an emerging research strengths in areas as diverse as ethics, governance, public and cultural policy, Asian studies, environmental sciences, biomedical sciences, information technology, microelectronics, tourism and leisure, nursing, and the visual, performing and creative arts. Professor Webb was also responsible for significant initiatives in the administrative and management areas of the university. On his recommendation, Council established the first positions of Pro-Vice Chancellor Information Service and Pro-Vice Chancellor Quality Advancement in an Australian university. He also initiated the establishment of the position of Pro-Vice Chancellor Equity, only the second university in our nation to create such a position. Griffith was the first university in Australia to bring the library and computing services together under one management, and is a leader in flexible learning, which uses communications and information technology to facilitate and enhance the learning experience for students. The university vigorously pursued internationalisation under his leadership. His international student body has almost quadrupled from just over 1,000 in 1995 to over 4,000 this year. And Griffith has won, as you have told us, Chancellor, 2 consecutive Premier of Queensland Awards for export excellence. The university has numerous agreements with overseas institutions in Asia, Europe, the United Kingdom, the United States and South America. Many of these exchange agreements were initiated by Professor Webb or were strengthened by his visits to the universities in order to establish personal contacts with his counterparts. He is a strong supporter of the Association of Southeast Asian Institutes of Higher Learning and played a key role in forging close educational ties with countries in this region. Closer to home, Professor Webb's ambition has always been for Griffith to be acknowledged as a valuable member of the Brisbane, Logan and Gold Coast communities and as an active contributor to the economic and social activity of this region. The university has developed strategic alliances with industry, government and community groups in areas ranging across the spectrum of its activities. Professor Webb developed a clear vision for Griffith as a multi-campus university serving the Brisbane Gold Coast corridor and as an institution dedicated to excellence and innovation. Particular mention should be made here of his achievement in the relocation of the Queensland Conservatorium and the Queensland College of Art to the magnificent location here on the South Bank, in establishing the Logan campus from a greenfield site and in developing such superb infrastructure on the Gold Coast campus. It is an indication of Professor Webb's high standing in the community that since his retirement he's been appointed as the chairperson of the Queensland Non-State Schools Accreditation Board and as chairperson of the State Library of Queensland. He also continues his long-standing involvement with the Foundation for Development Cooperation as a member of the Board of Governors. It is fitting that Griffith University should honour Leslie Roy Webb in recognition of his outstanding contributions to the development of this university. Chancellor, it is therefore with great pleasure that I present to you Emeritus Professor Leslie Roy Webb, OEMRI, for admission to the degree of Doctor of the University. Chancellor, we are also very proud tonight to present Professor Webb with an album of selected images of his 17 years with Griffith University.
Call upon Professor Roy Webb, OMRI, and Doctor of our University to deliver the occasional address.
Your Excellency, Chancellor, Vice Chancellor, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply grateful for the honour conferred on me by the Council of the University by admitting me as a graduate of the University, long last, and to the illustrious company of Honorary Doctors of the University. I'm particularly appreciative of the attendance here tonight of so many friends who have come from near and far to celebrate this occasion with me and members of my family. Indeed, some members of my family have come from afar. I am, of course, only one among many tonight who, with their own families and friends, are celebrating their graduation. I warmly congratulate all my fellow graduates and wish them great and enduring success in their careers and happiness and fulfilment in their lives. I once calculated that in the course of my life in universities, I have attended about 300 graduation ceremonies. I hope this never happens to any of you folks. And have therefore digested about 300 occasional addresses. You might think that out of this vast wealth of experience, I should be able to distill the quintessential graduation address. But I have to confess that inspiring though many of the addresses have been, and that of course applies without exception to those delivered by all the honorary doctors of the university who have gathered with me and graced this occasion with their presence here tonight, I nevertheless balked at the task of reviewing and summarising the notes I took of those excellent addresses. So I will be traversing some of the ground that Professor Davis has already generously covered. When I became Vice Chancellor of Griffith in 1985, the university was a small newcomer to the family of Australian universities with 3,500 students. Griffith was different from other universities, partly by design and partly in response to external constraints. It was, with Murdoch and Deakin, one of the last of the so-called plate glass or greenfield universities that, drawing on concepts introduced in new universities in the UK, adopted the interdisciplinary school approach to university organisation. Griffith's foundation commitments to areas such as environmental studies, Asian studies and cultural studies were novel at the time and fitted well with the school model. But regulatory constraints, combined with the university's own decisions, left Griffith without representation in any of the professions. Medicine, law, education, engineering and so on were missing. Medicine's still missing, but Professor Davis has advised me to watch this space. Initially, therefore, thoughts about development in the mid-1980s focused on the need for new areas of teaching and research. Proud as it was of its strong record as a young university and of its egalitarian approach to teaching, the university nevertheless suffered in the local scheme of things because it could not present a broad enough set of courses to prospective students. At the same time, the long-term consequences of economic change, following the oil shocks of the 1970s and the increasingly deregulated and market-driven policies of the 1980s, were delivering a derivative shock to the employment prospects of graduates generally. The automatic full employment of virtually all graduates, a feature of most decades since World War II, was increasingly a thing of the past. The achievement of greater responsiveness to employment markets required a major adjustment for universities like Griffith. The university was rightly reluctant to abandon its foundation principles, but needed to be better positioned to compete with other universities. In particular, it needed more programs in professional areas. Internal debates about these matters, however, were eclipsed by the publication in 1987 and 1988 of the Green and White Papers of the Hawke government, under the auspices of its Education Minister John Dawkins. Many things have been said and written about the Dawkins policies. Critics deprecate so-called Dawkins universities, meaning those colleges and institutes of the former advanced education sector which were transformed into universities as members of Dawkins' unified national system. Others saw the changes as opening new opportunities and as a major shift towards democratic ideals of education. The abolition of the so-called binary system, together with the requirement that institutions with less than the equivalent of 2,000 full-time students merge with other institutions, was a government response to the increasing difficulty of rationalising and policing the boundaries between the advanced education and the university sectors, particularly in relation to research. Many advanced education and technology institute academics, themselves active in research, had made known their resentment of their exclusion from research funding. At the same time, not all academics in universities were observed to be productive in the research for which they were being funded. As a small, narrowly based university, Griffith faced a new set of competitive pressures. Indeed, the enhanced status of the former colleges of advanced education together with the undiminished strength of the older universities, combined in a pincer movement to put pressure on Griffith's scope and prospects. The second major strand of Hawke government policies, in effect, the transformation of Australian higher education into a mass education system, proposed a target increase in Australia's annual output of higher education graduates from about 88,000 in 1988 to about 125,000 by the turn of the century. These targets now appear conservative when compared with the sustained growth that has in fact been achieved. Over 170,000 Australian students completed award courses in the year 2000. For Griffith, the new policy environment offered three options: stand alone, merge with another larger institution, or grow by absorbing other institutions. By choosing the third option, Griffith has been able to transform itself into a large university with, as we've heard, about 27,000 student enrolments and 6 campuses in the Brisbane Gold Coast corridor. 4 amalgamations brought a much-needed increase in the university's range of courses: education, the visual and performing arts, tourism and hotel management, for example. While the placement of the campuses, in due course including the new Logan campus, in Australia's most rapidly growing population region, brought additional government-funded student places and opportunities for opening new areas of teaching and research. While the processes and negotiations leading to the signing of binding amalgamation agreements were themselves sometimes lengthy and difficult, the business of making them work was, and I guess still remains, a continuing process. The blending of cultures, careers and futures involved in amalgamations can produce hybrid vigour, or it can produce a potpourri of envy, confusion and frustration. Griffith has emerged an expanded, more robust and exciting university as a result of its growth and amalgamations. I also hold the view that the same can be said for other universities that, like Griffith, participated vigorously in the opportunities generated by the growth and diversification of the higher education system during the last decade of the 20th century. Within the higher education community, however, it is common to hear complaints about the regulatory pressures towards uniformity and standardisation that are said to have flowed from the unified national system, more water, introduced by Dawkins, and which is still largely in place. It is said to be a system where one size fits all. Well, this is currently a more commonly expressed view than the view I hold, that the system has in fact diversified as it has grown. This issue deserves more careful empirical study than it has so far received. I offer the conjecture that the range of activities of Australian universities in 2002 is significantly greater than that of the combined advanced education and university sectors before 1987. For some commentators, however, the legitimisation of research in all higher education institutions still rankles as an unwelcome source of competition for scarce funds. They decry the widely shared aspirations of universities to be or become research universities. They criticise the unified national system by giving the word unified in that phrase the pejorative meaning of uniform. And uniform is taken to mean in particular that all institutions aspire, whereas they should not, to be involved in research, rather than allowing some, and the number 8 comes to mind, to focus on research and the rest of teaching, and the rest on teaching, with perhaps some research here and there. In some of the current debates about this issue, there is more than a hint that the Dawkins policies should be undone, that the old binary system distinguishing between teaching-only institutions and research universities, or some version of it, should be recreated. I believe that this would be a seriously retrograde step. In fact, I will argue that the direction of policy change should be in the reverse direction. No doubt the Australian developments of the 90s were not perfect. There is always ongoing need for reform and development. But it is possible, I suggest, that Australia has hit on, or could at least head towards, something very worthwhile, something not attempted in other countries, and which may well be highly prospective in terms of productive democratic education. I refer to the creation of an approach to post-school education that would be free altogether of government-prescribed sectors. In such an environment, individual institutions could develop their own shape and purpose, in principle in as many styles as there are institutions, meeting the diverse needs of students and their families and of employers in an interactive and developmental mode. Dawkins did not go that far. He changed Australia's three-sector system of vocational education and training, advanced education and universities to a two-sector system of universities on the one hand and vocational education and training institutions on the other. This two-sector system has turned out, not surprisingly, to be just as capable of generating confusion and resentment as was the binary distinction between colleges of advanced education and universities that Dawkins abolished. But the policy issues relating to the interface between vocational education and training and universities need perhaps only be an issue if it is assumed that we must always have government-imposed sectors. The experience of the unified national system can therefore be viewed in two lights. It can be seen as an enforcement of uniformity on two hitherto usefully distinct types of institution, a heavy-handed regulatory and bureaucratic intervention riding roughshod over worthwhile diversity, or it can be seen as the first major step towards the abolition of government-imposed sectoral boundaries, boundaries which are legislated and perhaps politically driven, and which erect fences in a landscape which otherwise might well show less demarcation. I wish to commend the latter view. Could Australia now take a further major step? Instead of falling back from the position it has reached, could it dare to adopt an approach where government does not prescribe categories of institution and their related activities, but funds activities as such, allocating funds to those institutions and individuals, demonstrating appropriate capabilities, dispensing thereby with the need for prior sectoral classification? Such a development would generate some difficulties, no doubt, but a good proportion of those difficulties would, I suggest, diminish in significance if the legitimate intervention of government in education were to be seen as exclusively concerned with improving opportunities and outcomes for all citizens, and not at all concerned with protecting the status and market positions of existing interest groups and institutions. It would be arrogant, although I must say it is tempting, to suggest that the blending, indeed the abolition of sectors within Griffith during the 90s provides a model for a sector-free approach to post-school education. But I think it is worth encouraging serious study of institutions which have absorbed elements of the three pre-1987 sectors. In Griffith's case, a pre-1987 university joined with three former colleges of advanced education, or campuses, and a former TAFE college. In my view, the success of these amalgamations depended more on the abolition of sectoral distinctions within the post-amalgamation university than on any other single factor. That is to say, it depended on a high degree of operational and credible inclusiveness. Griffith was, and I'm sure still is, an institution where no one is prejudged or pre-classified so that they're excluded from particular opportunities and competitions. It might be thought that the vision of a sector-free post-school education system would mean that there would be no operational differentiation between groups of institutions and no market segmentation. On the contrary, in common with other activities in our society, identifiable aggregations of institutions would no doubt develop for various practical purposes. But such groups would not be mandated by government and would not be allowed to become locked into regulatory and funding arrangements designed to protect and reinforce sectors. In such a world, we might be able to tackle the regrettable tendency in education whereby sectoral labels as such, rather than performance, are assumed to confer status and prestige and to imply quality. Of course, it is predictable that given the prestige of the word university within existing sectoral arrangements, there will still be a strong preference by institutions to call themselves universities in an environment free of government-imposed sectors. Over time, however, other names and terms would emerge and gather meaning and be seen to fit more effectively with the purposes of particular institutions. After all, it is Griffith University we are proud to identify with tonight, not some amorphous, colourless, odourless and flavourless member of a homogenised unified national system. Some will see the idea of post-school education free of government-imposed sectors as completely fanciful. That's what I would have thought if it had been suggested to me in 1985 that Griffith would grow to 27,000 students in 2001. Thank you.